Hi, I'm Paul, your host for today's Warm Natters podcast. Welcome to episode 2. Today I'm joined by Andrea Howe and Richard Honey, energy officers at Cosy Homes in Lancashire, based in Blackpool. Now, Cosy Homes in Lancashire is a successful, well-recognised scheme throughout Lancashire, running for over 10 years now. Do you have any case studies that you might be able to share with us where Cosy Homes in Lancashire has made an active difference in people's lives and well-being?
Oh, loads, I would guess. I'll let Andrea go first.
Yeah. Oh, I've got to tell you one of my very favourite stories, and it was a gentleman who lived in Preston, and this is going back probably 10 years, just at the start of the scheme, and it was back in the day when we were allowed to it's a dirty word, gas.
Don't
we were
say
allowed to
any
do
dirty
gas
words.
central heating. We're not allowed to do gas central heating these days. It's all got to be energy. No.
Don't burn any fossil fuel.
No, not anymore. Anyway, so we were doing a scheme for first-time central heating, and a gentleman in Preston applied, and he worked part-time. He was in his 60s, and he hadn't had any heating or hot water in his property for over 12 years.
Wow.
I know. When it was winter, he kind of set up a tent and a sleeping bag in his front room because it was so cold in his house. And that's how he lived during the winter.
For 12 years?
For 12 years, every winter, in the cold months, he got his tent, put a tent up, had a sleeping bag, he had a little dog, and that's where they slept when it was really cold in the winter. So we put a leaflet through his door, first time central heating, and he actually came to the town hall in Preston to ask if he could apply.
So he wasn't targeted, this was just purely a random mail drop?
Random mail drop. So he came to the town hall because he wasn't far from Preston city centre, and he came in and he applied because he qualified, and we installed first time central heating, so a boiler with radiators. We did some insulation, so cavity wall insulation and loft insulation. And when all the work was done, he came back to us. Well, he filled a questionnaire and he came back to say how it had made such a difference to his life. And one of the biggest impacts on his life was that while he was cold in the winter months, he developed a gambling addiction. And that's what he did in his tent at night. He gambled. And he said as soon as his house was warm and he felt happy going into his home at night after work and he was comfortable and warm, his gambling addiction just disappeared.
It was a welcoming environment to
Absolutely.
go back home to.
Absolutely.
Making all the difference.
And certainly for a couple of years, he would come and he'd come to a lot of events and he would tell his story to other residents and encourage people to go through our scheme. So that's one of my favourite stories.
How long would it have taken from start to finish?
Fairly quickly. He applied. We had quite considerable amounts of money back then, so we appointed a contractor. So the works were all done within a couple of months. So full central heating system. He lived in an end terrace property, so we did cavity wall at the end on his gable end, loft insulation. I think we did some draft proofing, etc. And yeah, he was absolutely over the moon, and it changed his life.
Good. What happens to how much disruption would you say? I suppose it depends on whatever measure the residents are having had done at the time or number of measures they're having had done at the time. How much disruption would the resident face during the works process?
Depends on the measure. Obviously some simple measures such as loft insulation, very little disruption. First time central heating, a lot of pipe works going in, so there is some disruption, but it can all be done and dusted within 3 or 4 days. But certainly some of the larger measures, internal wall insulation, external wall insulation, they can be quite disruptive and take a bit longer. But we tell people before the work starts kind of the level of disruption they can expect, and most of the time they're happy to go with it.
With a top-notch team on it, as I'm sure
Top-notch
you
team,
guys
absolutely.
select, the disruption should be kept to a minimum. And I suppose it's a case of for the greater good, really, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I mean, from that story you've just told me about the gentleman sleeping in a sleeping bag in a tent.
In this day and age.
When you look at where he is now to where he was then I suppose the disruption
it was
worthwhile
for him.
Yeah. Richard, do you have any
Yeah,
stories?
I've got, just following on from that, there's no discrimination. Andrea's mentioned there that there was a gentleman there in his 60s with a gambling addiction. we recently helped a lovely young guy, probably around 30. He lived in a house that was in a conservation area and had damp, which is a real problematic issue throughout the whole of the county. So we do spend a lot of time trying to eradicate those issues and also educating people on ventilation to help get rid of airflow, improve that, and get rid of the damp and mould and the moisture in the issues
as well. That's obviously been in the news a lot recently as well.
Yeah. So we went into this house in a conservation area, old house, solid wall, had a ginnel. As I've picked that word up, I'm from the south. We don't use that. We don't use that word in the south very often. But for those in the south that are watching this, if you don't know what a ginnel is, it's an alley. So this property was slightly hard to treat, but we put solar panels on the roof, and we put some internal wall insulation into the property. And the reason that this stands out for me is, funnily enough, you mentioned disruption with Andrea's case study, but internal wall insulation is quite disruptive, and it is really important that people understand that the measures that we're putting in place are to help them. And there's going to be a degree of pain that goes with that. We try and reduce that and mitigate it as much as we can to a minimum. But the reality is, when you're putting wall insulation in internally, there's going to be dust flying around. You're going to need access to the, you need, your wall to your floor, to the ceiling. You're putting in partitions. You're reducing the living space. So that's one area that you need to let people know about. But it's also the disruption. This gentleman was lucky enough that he was actually going on holiday. The story doesn't end there though. So during his time away, we managed to get the solar panels on. We managed to get some wall insulation in there into this hard to treat property very successfully. But the main point of this story is the contractor that we used was so thorough. When we were looking at the floor, we found that it was wet. So it was part timber, part concrete, and it was wet. Now, if we'd have carried on and not rectified that problem, then we'd have spent all the money on wall insulation and solar panels, but the house would have had problems further down the line because we hadn't sorted that problem out. So we were very fortunate that the relationship we have with installers, they were quite happy to come forward to us and say, look, there's an issue here, what should we do? Andrew and I sat down and said, well, I think we should resolve this issue before we go any further, and we did that. So the house has almost had a whole house retrofit essentially, from floor, walls, the roof, and hopefully that gentleman will not encounter any problems further down the line. So it's nice when you come in and you're, I've got some lovely wall insulation and solar panels, but you want to make sure that further down the line there aren't any issues. And because our installer had flagged that, we were able to resolve that. And just as importantly there, we're now well aware that those houses in that particular area, if they're of similar build, because they're of similar age, then it's possible that we're going to have those issues again. So rather than just go jumping in with 2 feet, putting wall insulation in or solar panels, we can try and look a little bit deeper. So we're always learning. That gentleman is now benefiting from a warm house that reduces his bills. He's got the solar panels to help with electricity. And he's over the moon. Yes, he's lost a tiny bit of living space, and he's had to endure a little bit of disruption. But you know what? He's over the moon, and we kind of set a new boundary there. In a conservation area, we were able to put solar panels in, and we've given that wall insulation. So we now know what we need to do in that area. So if anybody inquires in that area, Andrea and I know that we can go in and put some really life-changing measures in. Yeah,
you mentioned conservation area, and quite often solar panels in conservation areas is a sticking point with local planners, and they're the bane of our lives a lot, aren't they, Richard, with air source heat pumps, solar. But on that particular house, they agreed to the in-roof style, so they were kind of sunk into the roof and they didn't go above the roof line, so it was allowed. So, if people think that they don't qualify for certain things because of their because they're in a conservation area, please, come forward and ask, because there's ways around things.
How restrictive is it if you find yourself in a conservation area?
it can be quite restrictive depending on, there's different grades of conservation areas. So we do have a problem with windows and doors in conservation areas, because they do need planning permission, and they usually have to be timber frames with double glaze. They have to keep the look of the original sash windows, so they can be expensive. So we can't always replace windows and doors in conservation areas, but there's other lower grade conservation areas where the planners a little bit more willing to kind of allow certain things to happen. So it's always good to ask.
And with our experience, you know, in each local authority, the team that we've got, you know, we're able to almost predict whether we're going to get there. So we don't want to waste anybody's time. But like Andrew says, with that case with solar panels, it was nice that they were embedded into the roof.
I did think you were going to say that the issue was that he came back from his holiday and didn't recognise the outside of his own house and drove past.
No, that didn't happen. He's thrilled. I mean, he's got a lovely warm home now that he's got cheaper energy bills, you know, and he feels really safe in his home, and he knows that the improvements have been done to such a good standard. You know, when you get builders in and sometimes because you don't know who they are, or they've come via recommendation, or you've just sourced them. I was about to say the Yellow Pages, but probably people watching this might not remember the Yellow Pages.
I'm not old enough, Richard.
All right,
No.
right. So you know, you might have just sourced the building. You don't know them from Adam, and you know, the installers that we use, they have to go through such a rigorous process to be on the scheme that we know that they produce really good work, and the work that they've produced in this particular case and every single property that they work on is of top-notch standards.
I think it shows how thorough as well that they've gone in to do a particular number of measures and then encountered a problem, which obviously they could have, if they were maybe dodgy. Maybe they could have just skipped over it and dealt with the issues later on. But the fact that it was picked up and dealt with and addressed at the time, I think is testament to the work.
And they understand the scheme and the good work that we do. So I think, you know, if they understand the purpose, then as long as they've got the skilled workforce, then they can deliver the measures that we want, and then our customer will benefit from everything. So you know, it was fantastic that they came to us and said that there's a problem here. I'm sure that the moment they found that problem, they didn't want to make that call, but you know, they were honest about it, and that's all we want.
They made the right call.
They made the right call, you know, and it just enforces the relationship. So we now know that when they're out, they're quite happy to come to us and say, look, there's an issue here. What should we do? And you know, we're all about helping these people and making, you know, we understand that the house is old. You know, it needs pulling up.
And you don't want them coming back 5 years
Ideally
down the line.
not. It's always nice to hear from people that have had a good job, isn't it? It's nice to get compliments
but not to come back with problems in 5 years down the line.
No, we don't
problems
want
that we could have
good
prevented.
feedback, welcome.
Absolutely.
Have you received much in the way of feedback from people over the years?
We get a lot of good feedback, don't we? Loads of good feedback. You know, we're always conscious that those people that, you know, we have a fantastic service where through our Cosy Homes advice team, every measure that every completion, we have somebody that will contact that person to see how they have felt. We have a lot of data on quantitative and qualitative data on the experience, and you know, we care deeply to make sure that they're happy and that they've enjoyed enjoy is probably not the right word, is it? Because it can be quite an onerous process.
They've been satisfied with the process.
But they're satisfied to the best that they can be. If just a member of the public has solar panels installed, then you know, you're paying for that, and you know, you'd expect a level of service. Well, we treat every property like it's our own, and we want the installers to feel like that as well. So the quality of the work is top notch, and that particular resident, he's been great, hasn't he?
Absolutely.
We have a lot of compliments. And any issues we resolve quickly. So generally, we run a scheme where we're never stressed out by too many complaints. We get a lot of compliments, which makes it all worthwhile.
Good. So do you have any other noteworthy case studies you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, quite a recent one from last year. It was a group of 7 properties, almshouses. So almshouses are in effect private tenants. But they rent their homes from trustees, and they're kind of classed as the poorer people in a community. So there's a little group of 7 almshouses in a place called Barnacre with Bonds up in Wyre, and 7 bungalows, and they had very old storage heaters that weren't efficient anymore, and all 7 residents had solar panel and battery storage fitted and air source heat pumps. And everyone thinks that air source heat pumps are too difficult for people of a certain age to kind of work and manage. But these 7 residents, their ages range from 76 was the youngest and 95 was the oldest. And we went back to do a video of these properties and some of the residents, and they all were over the moon with their new heating systems. They could manage it well. They felt warm. Certainly one lady that we interviewed, she said, you know, her house was warm day and night, and she didn't sleep well, and she used to get up in the night and go and switch the telly on, and before the work she said, you know, it was cold and she didn't feel comfortable sitting there watching the TV, but since the work's been done and the air source heat pump fitted, the temperature is warm and toasty day and night, and she absolutely raved about it. And one thing she did say, which was quite amusing, she felt that with the old heating system, all the rooms always felt damp, especially the toilet. And she said the toilet paper always felt damp.
Oh no.
But since the work was done and she felt nice and warm and toasty, she said it was just a pleasure going into all of her rooms. And I think that's lovely.
That's a
the
big
fact
difference.
that
Yeah.
Her toilet
95-year-old.
her toilet paper was no longer damp.
It wasn't. It was
Right.
nice and crisp.
Yeah.
And if they have any problems, obviously the only air source heat pumps that we use on our scheme are manufactured in Lytham St Anne's, one of the only British-made air source heat pumps on the market, and they can monitor them remotely. So one of the ladies in the almshouses said, you know, if ever I've got a problem, I just give them a ring and they can tinker with it and make sure it's all working properly for me. So that was a lovely story. So age isn't a barrier to having any new technologies
know.
put in your
Good
house.
to know.
Yes.
Richard, Andrea, thank you very much. And finally, where would people go if they wanted to know a bit more information?
We've got our dedicated website, Cosy Homes in Lancashire, so you can just do a Google search, but the address is www.chil.uk.com, and we do have a dedicated phone number, or people can just go to the local authority as well and ask about the scheme.
Thank you very much. And we'll see you guys in episode 3.